All right, so you're looking for a new RPG, right? And this year, oh boy, this year it's like every single game wants a piece of you. But you're intrigued, aren't you, by Bloomtown, a different story. This indie game that's promising something, well, different. And we've got a whole stack of reviews here, so we're diving in to see if it lives up to the hype.
And from what I'm seeing, it's quite a mix. We've got demon battles, time management, even a little bit of gardening.
Oh, yeah, don't forget about making deals with Lucifer himself. I mean, come on, that's got to be interesting, right?
Definitely grabs your attention. A lot of reviewers are comparing it to games like Persona and Earthbound, but with a, let's say, unique twist.
You know, it's funny how every game gets compared to something else. But hey, if those comparisons get people excited, who are we to judge, right? So we've got these familiar elements, but what exactly makes Bloomtown stand out? What's got people talking?
Well, the setting is a big part of it. Imagine a picturesque 1960s town, kids riding bikes, summer sun, that classic Americana vibe.
Hmm.
But then things take a dark turn. Kids start disappearing, and you, playing as Emily, discover this hidden world of demons lurking just beneath the surface.
It's like Leave It to Beaver meets Stranger Things, right?
Exactly. That blend of cozy nostalgia and creepy undertones seems to be a big part of the appeal.
And it's in those shadows where Emily makes a deal with the devil himself. Talk about high-stakes summer vacation. But okay, creepy vibes aside, the reviewers are raving about the game's visuals. Apparently, the pixel art is stunning, especially in this underside demon world.
Oh, absolutely. One reviewer described a demon as a veiny-brained vampire with blood IV drips. Let me tell you, that visual stuck with me.
Okay, that's vivid. And the soundtrack.
Another high point.
Yeah.
Especially those battle themes. Some reviewers said they'd buy the soundtrack separately if they could.
All right, so we've got style, but what about the substance? How does this game actually play?
Well, in Bloomtown, you really get to live in the world. During the day, you're building up Emily's skills and resources. We're talking gardening, part-time jobs, hanging out with friends, classic life sim stuff. But then night falls, and you're diving into the underside to battle demons and unravel the mystery of those missing kids.
So it's like juggling two lives, normal teen by day, demon slayer by night. Did the reviewers feel like those two halves of the game worked well together?
Some reviewers loved the time management aspect, especially those who love games like Persona. But a few others felt the impact of your daytime activities on the demon slaying wasn't as strong as they'd hoped. Like maybe maxing out your gardening skills didn't quite feel necessary when facing down a demon lord.
But maybe you get bonus points for style, right? I mean, who wouldn't be intimidated by a perfectly pruned rosebush? Okay, but let's get to the good stuff. The demon battling.
Yeah.
What's the combat like?
Get ready for a familiar tune, but with a twist, turn-based combat, Bloomtown style. You've got your standard attacks, but you can also capture demons and fuse them together to create even stronger allies. Each demon has different elemental strengths and weaknesses, so there's a nice layer of strategy there.
All right, classic JRPG mechanics, but hey, those mechanics are classic for a reason, right? They can be super addictive when done well. So, what did the reviewers think of Bloomtown's take on them?
And that's where things get interesting, you see, because the reviews, they're a bit mixed on this one. Some reviewers, they absolutely love the combat. They love the strategy of it, figuring out which demons to fuse, how to exploit those enemy weaknesses. They even said the animations for those combo attacks, super satisfying.
Oh, I love when a game makes you feel like you can really pull off something cool, A little bit of flash goes a long way. But it sounds like not everyone was quite as sold on the combat as you were. What were some of the complaints?
Yeah, some reviewers, they found it a tad slow, especially if you're used to those really fast-paced RPGs. And oh, this is another thing. There's no escaping battles once they've started. So if you wander into a fight underleveled, hoo boy, you better be ready to grind.
Yeah, that's old school RPGs for you, right? Sometimes you gotta embrace the grind. But speaking of old school RPGs, you know what I love? Those dialogue choices. Give me some of those choose your own adventure vibes, Bloomtown. Tell me it delivers.
Okay, so get this, because this is where Bloomtown gets really interesting. Your dialogue choices, they aren't just about picking the quote-unquote right answer, okay? They're actually tied to Emily's personality stats. Those stats you're building up alongside all that gardening and demon slaying.
So it's not just about what you say, it's about who Emily is, huh? I like where this is going. Tell me more. How do those personality stats actually influence what you can say or do?
So imagine this. You're trying to, I don't know, convince a grumpy shopkeeper to give you a discount on something. Now, if you've got a high charm stat, you might be able to sweet talk them into it, right? But if your bravery stat's through the roof, Well, there might be a slightly more persuasive option on the table.
This is what I'm talking about. Okay, tell me more, tell me more. The reviewers mentioned something about dice rolls being involved in these dialogue choices too. What's the deal with that?
Okay, so picture this. You're about to have this really important conversation with a potential ally, right? You got your line all prepped, you're feeling good, and then bam, the game hits you with a dice roll.
Oh, no. I hate when games do that.
Right. And depending on how lucky you are, or unlucky as the case may be, that conversation could go in a totally different direction than you planned.
So even with max charm, you could still totally fumble a social interaction thanks to some bad luck. Talk about pressure.
Exactly. It really adds this element of randomness that you don't always see in RPGs.
Yeah.
One reviewer even admitted to reloading his save a few times because a bad roll caused them to miss out on a side quest.
Oh, I can totally see that happening. Just one more roll, right? Okay, so we got time management, demon battles with a twist, dialogue choices that keep you on your toes. But it's called Bloomtown. A different story for a reason, right? What about the actual story itself? Is it just another save the world plot, or is there something more to it?
It definitely has those classic RPG elements.
Mm-hmm.
The looming threat, the chosen hero, all that. But what reviewers really seemed to appreciate was how Bloomtown weaves in these darker, more mature themes, all underneath this charming, almost whimsical exterior.
Okay, so we've got demons missing children. What kind of darker themes are we talking about specifically? Don't hold back.
Well, remember how we were talking about those real-world activities Emily takes part in? The gardening, the part-time jobs, all that. Well, those aren't just there for the gameplay loop. They actually tie into the game's exploration of some pretty heavy stuff. Loss, grief, the weight of responsibility. One reviewer even mentioned a side quest that dealt with a character struggling with the loss of a loved one and how it really resonated with them on a personal level.
Wow, that's pretty heavy stuff, especially for a game with, demon familiars. It sounds like Bloomtown isn't shying away from some complex emotions.
Not at all. And honestly, that seems to be what a lot of reviewers connected with the most. It's more than just a fun RPG to pass the time. It's a game that makes you feel something,
Right. It's giving To Kill a Mockingbird, but with demon summoning. Okay, speaking of demon summoning, let's dive a little deeper into that demon fusion system. You mentioned it before, but remind us, how does it actually work? What makes it different from other games where you can, combine creatures or monsters?
Bloomtown's fusion system, it's more about forming bonds. Instead of just grabbing two random demons and mashing them together to make some super-powered being, you choose a specific demon to level up, and then you sacrifice others to increase their power. It's less about collecting trophies and more about investing in your companions.
So you're really picking a favorite and helping them grow, which I imagine adds a whole other layer of strategy to the game. It's not just about finding the most powerful demon anymore. It's about who you connect with, who you want to see succeed.
Exactly. One reviewer even mentioned that having to sacrifice a demon they'd grown attached to, even for a strategic advantage, it actually gave them pause. Like they were betraying a friend almost.
Wow, now that's an emotional connection you don't see in every RPG. It sounds like Bloomtown walks this really interesting line between, lighthearted fun and some surprisingly deep themes. But is it just me, or is there something inherently fascinating about a game set in this idealized version of the 1960s? You know what I mean? Like, that whole aesthetic?
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge part of the game's charm. Reviewers use words like charming and nostalgic constantly. There's just something about that era, the music, the fashion, that sense of optimism. It really seems to resonate, even with gamers who weren't even alive back then.
Maybe it's that juxtaposition of the familiar and the unknown. Like, Bloomtown is both this comforting throwback and this reminder that things aren't always as simple as they seem.
It's like those old Twilight Zone episodes, right? Where everything seems so normal on the surface, but there's this underlying sense of unease, like something is just a little bit off.
Yeah.
And that definitely seems to be a big part of what makes Bloomtown so compelling.
Speaking of compelling, I can't get over this soundtrack. We've touched on it a little, but those battle themes. Paint me a picture. What kind of vibes are we talking about here?
Okay, so picture this. You're facing down that veiny-brained vampire we talked about, right? The tension is building.
Yeah.
You're about to unleash your ultimate attack, and suddenly this upbeat, jazzy track kicks in.
Oh, I'm already sold. Jazzy battle themes. Sign me up.
It's got that classic JRPG energy, but with a modern twist. One reviewer even compared it to the Persona 5 soundtrack, which is high praise in my book.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but let's circle back to that big question. Bloomtown. A different story. Does it live up to its name? Is it truly something different?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, it's not like Bloomtown is reinventing the wheel or anything. It wears its influences on its sleeve. Those comparisons to Persona, Earthbound, they're there for a reason.
But a game doesn't have to be revolutionary to be great, right? Sometimes it's about taking familiar elements and giving them a fresh coat of paint, adding those little details that make all the difference.
Exactly. And that's what I think Bloomtown does well. It takes those classic RPG mechanics,
Yeah.
turn-based combat, time management, demon fusion, all that good stuff, but it infuses them with this unique blend of charm, emotional depth, and yes, maybe even a touch of darkness.
It's like that comfort food you crave, but with like a little spicy kick to it. So for those of you listening, trying to decide if this is the RPG experience for you, what should you consider?
Based on these reviews, it seems like it really comes down to this. It comes down to this.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a game that's going to like completely reinvent the wheel, Bloomtown might not be it.
So not exactly breaking new ground, more like polishing up what's already there.
Yeah, kinda. But if what you're really craving is that classic JRPG feel, those charming worlds where you can really sink your teeth into building up a character, exploring all the nooks and crannies, forming bonds with some, let's be honest, pretty quirky companions, then Bloomtown, a different story. It just might be right up your alley.
Yeah, I get that. It's like that warm, fuzzy feeling you get from revisiting a favorite childhood spot. Familiar, comforting, but still with its own unique charm, you know?
Exactly. And let's not forget that soundtrack. Seriously, those jazzy battle themes add so much to the experience, even when you're getting your butt kicked by a demon lord. Which, let's be real, happens to the best of us.
Oh, for sure, for sure. You got to embrace those losses, right? Learn from your mistakes and come back swinging. But after all this talk about demon fusion and time management and that killer 1960s vibe, there's one thing I still want to touch on.
Hit me with it.
The characters. We've talked about everything else, but are the characters in Bloomtown just, there to move the plot along? Or do they actually feel like, well, real people?
That's a great question. And actually, that's one thing the reviewers seemed really impressed by. They mentioned that Emily, the main character you play as, she actually feels like a real person. Flaws and all, not just some generic hero type.
Okay, that's good to hear. Nothing pulls me out of a game faster than a boring one-dimensional character.
Yeah.
You gotta have that depth, that complexity to really draw people in.
Totally agree. And Bloomtown seems to deliver on that front. One reviewer even mentioned how much they enjoyed the writing, even those seemingly mundane moments, like just hanging out with friends or doing chores. It's those little details that really bring a world to life, you know?
Totally. So, okay, after diving deep into all of this, who do you think Bloomtown, a different story, is really for? Like, what kind of gamer is going to get the most out of this experience?
That's a tough one, honestly, because it's not a game for everyone, right? It's not trying to be the biggest, loudest, most innovative thing out there.
So we're back to that word, different. But how is it different, really? Is it just the whole cozy nostalgia meets darker themes thing?
I think it's more than that. It's like Bloomtown. It's a game about contrasts. It's about finding those little moments of beauty in the everyday, about choosing to embrace joy even when things are tough, about the importance of connection, especially when it feels like the world's falling apart around you.
So it's a game for the deep thinkers, the feelers, those of us who appreciate those quiet, introspective moments just as much as the big, action-packed ones.
Exactly. And honestly, if you're looking for a game that's going to stay with you long after you've finished it, a game that might just make you see the world a little differently, then yeah, Bloomtown, a different story, might just be the game for you.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into Bloomtown, a different story, is complete. Whether you're adding it to your must playlist or deciding to sit this one out, hopefully this deep dive has given you something to think about. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time for another exciting adventure into the heart of gaming.